what can I do with the Bonita Test Toolkit? Well, before diving into a bit details, just to give you where we stand in terms of testing, because testing is a vast and complex topic. Usually, one of the common elements that's shared about testing is the famous pyramid of testing, where you have at the base the unit test, then you have the servers integration test, and then you have the UI test. So the UI part, top of the pyramid, is something that's a bit more generic, where a lot of pre-existing tool can do great work, such as Selenium. So it didn't make sense for Bonita to start to try to have something that performs those tools, since you can find anything on the web or on the market. The unit test part is something that's really interesting, but unfortunately for us, we still have a few technical limitations that would allow us to fully manage unit testing. We do have unit tests on all our artifacts since we moved to the project composition, and all our artifacts are mostly done with Maven archetypes, where you can use tests, but the unit test of your process is not something that we can support yet. And then we have the integration, and that's where we stand. The Bonita Test Toolkit allows you to perform integration tests, which are basically end-to-end tests without the UI. So what can you do exactly with the Bonita Test Toolkit? Well, you basically can do two things. You can perform actions, and then you can make assertions, making you able to check elements. So you can start a process with a specific user, let's say Walter Bate, and then you can check the status of the case, the task, check the BDM, the process variables, and so on. And you can run your whole process, go through all different paths, and every time check that you are going in the right direction, that you have that is correct, and so on. So what we're going to do here, we're going to take a really basic project, which is this project that you have in front of you, where I have the basic process, which is an inventory request process, where an user can ask for a specific inventory, and we'll be able to check the inventory and refuse or not that request. So it's pretty standard. We do have on the institution a contract, and we also have a contract on the task, and we do have a BDM. So now let's see how we can test that project with the Bonita Test Toolkit. So there's two ways to create the test project. You can have a standalone test project, or you can put your test project within your Bonita project. So for this example, we'll put the test within the Bonita project. So here in my studio folder, I'll go to workspace and I'll open my project. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a new folder called tests. The first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to create the form.xml file. You can use documentation to help you create that file. I'm just going to open it so you can see how it looks, but it's pretty standard Maven form.xml file, where we'll be able to define the group ID, artifact ID version of the test project. It's not the same thing as the gabs you have for the main project. And then I'll be able to define what are the dependencies I'll be using to create my test. So in our case, we're using unit, Bonita Test Toolkit, of course, SLG, availability, and logback. Once you define your form.xml, you're back to a standard Maven project flow. So I'll be using my favorite IDU, because of course this is coding, so this is outside the studio, and I'll be able to work on my test project. So of course I have to create the correct folder structure, which is something standard in when we're working with Maven project, and I'll be able to create my different test classes. So of course we do have a specific naming for the test classes, which is the IT at the end before the .java. For IT stands for integration testing. So in each classes, I'll be loading all the different elements that will be required to make a test, and I have different methods which correspond to different scenarios. So in our case, I have two scenarios, which is one for each possibility. One where we have some stock and we'll send the items, and one where we don't have any stock and we'll send an email. So if we look a bit into more detail on how each test scenario is defined, it is pretty standard. Basically, I'm just describing how to run different steps of my process. and I'll be checking different elements. So let's first look at the beginning of the test. So in this test, for example, we're getting the user that will be launching the process. So in our case, it is Walter Bates. We're also getting the process we'll be launching, which is inventory request. We're building the corresponding contract that we'll be using to launch that process. So as you can see, I'm using a specific builder to create my contract that matches my really basic contract I have here. And from there, I can just start my contract, my process with the contract. So here I'm starting the process, so with the specific contract and the specific user. And then I can do my first check. So once I've started my process, I want to check that the process has been started, meaning that I have a pending task, which is check the stock. And then I can move on by checking also the status of the BDM. So in our case, we're looking for the request business data, and I'll be able to check that the item ID has the right value, and the quantity that's requested is equal to 5. And I can move on and make sure that the process follows the flow. I can get other users, and I can check that that user from LinkedIn new has a new task that's pending, which is the check the stock. So it allows me to check also the filtering of users for different tasks. And I can just describe the whole flow of my process, and every time I can check all different elements, which can be tasks, documents, statuses, and so on. And I can do this for any scenarios, any use case, and I can try to really test the whole logic of my process. So once I've defined the whole logic, actually at any time, I can just run my test by doing a basic maven command, which is the verify command. So by default, it's going to, if you just do a maven verify, it's going to run the test locally on the local host. In my case, I'm just running the tests on my local host, which is my studio. And as you can see, it's going to run all the different elements, and I'll be able to see the result of my test. So in our case, there was no issue. I can see that we found a task that was pending and so on. You can define how much velocity you want, but that's pretty much basically it. I can move on, and this can be applied as it's working with localhost. I can at the same time work on my process and work on my test at the same time, and I can check whether what I've done in my process makes sense by just checking the logic with my test at the same time. So it's quite powerful. And of course, if I want, from this command, I can launch command on the test command on a remote server. And of course, I can deploy this project into a continuous integration. I'll be able to run the same test.